There's a lot to pull a person into the brilliant world of Kentaro Miura. Like every manga, Berserk also delivers its first impressions through each volume's unique cover art. Generally, it serves the purpose of helping a volume build on the themes established within the story. But along with this, the cover art is also used by multiple platforms like bookstores and websites as the face of the volume and the series. That being said, let's dive in and look at how well each volume's cover art depicted the story within. First up, we have Volume 1. This sets up the story of Berserk and Guts by introducing the character and the world, and the visual for the volume cover is also iconic. I give this a 9 out of 10. This is when we start to get a bit into the story and we understand what kind of character Guts is. We can see that he's bruised and battered in this with a bunch of scars and he's trying to fix his prosthetic hand. I think it's a pretty cool visual, but it's quite empty. I would give this a 7 out of 10. Then we have the third volume, which has 4 chapters, and this is where the Black Swordsman arc ends and the Golden Age arc begins. But as for the visual, I think Guts kinda looks weird in this. For some reason, he actually looks a bit short. I'll give this a 6 out of 10. Then we have Volume 4. A young Guts appears in all his glory, and behind him we also see multiple warriors. And shows the character of Guts in a really cool way. He's bloody and battered, but he's ready to take on whatever comes next. I think I'd give this a 9 out of 10. Then we have Volume 5, which has 8 chapters. At this point in the series, we've started focusing a lot on the Band of the Hawk, and we start to get a lot of context as to who Griffith is, what the dynamic between him and Guts is, and sort of expanding our understanding of the world as a whole. The visuals are rather 90s-esque, and the faces are also a bit dated. I would give this a 7 out of 10. Then we have the 6th volume. The visual for this volume is pretty cool. I think the armor that Guts has on is pretty unique, and I think it's really well designed and suits his character a lot. I'd give this a 9 out of 10. After this we have the 7th volume, and I feel this is a bit of a step down in terms of the visual. I'd give this a 6. Then we have Volume 8. I think this visual is pretty interesting because it kind of shows how Guts is in the shadows of Griffith. The only thing sort of holding this visual back for me, the 90s and early 2000s faces of the characters, which is indicative of the time, but it sort of brings the rating down a bit for me. I would give this cover art a 7 out of 10. Then we have the 9th volume, which has 11 chapters, and at this point Guts has left the Band of the Hawk, and we sort of see him develop as a character on his own, and we also see the struggles that the Band of Hawk sort of goes through during this part. The visual for this volume is pretty cool. There's a lot of detail in the background and there's also a lot of color. I would give this volume an 8 out of 10. Then we have the 10th volume. It has Skull Knight in the background while Guts is in the foreground. The strokes and the shadows are very well defined. The lighting is very dynamic, and the overall feeling of this volume is also condensed well into this one visual. Overall, I'd give this volume's cover art an 8 out of 10. I have a few mixed feelings for this one because I feel the character design for Guts is not very well made in this, but overall the visual is decent, so I'd give this a 7 out of 10. Then we have the 12th volume, which has 10 chapters. The visual for this one shows the birth of Femto, and it condenses the story within the volume in a very appropriate way as well. I'd give this another 8 out of 10. Then we have Volume 13, which has 12 chapters and focuses on the climax of the eclipse. The state of the story during this point was deeply traumatizing. The visual for this volume vividly captures the gory and gruesome details of the eclipse, and it's very well made despite being extremely traumatizing. Like, we can see the chopped off arm of Guts with a broken sword that can barely damage any of the monstrosities that are looming behind him. And behind all those monstrosities, we see the god hand with the silhouette of Femto coming down towards them. It's at this point in the story when the pieces of the puzzles finally start to come together and we understand the rage Guts felt towards Griffith was truly justified. And we can conclusively say one thing, and that is, fuck Griffith. And if you disagree, that's cool, but fuck you too. This is definitely the best visual we've seen so far. Then we have the 14th volume, which has 8 chapters and 1 bonus chapter. It's at this point when the Golden Age arc finally ends and the Conviction arc begins. I like the visual for this volume because it has a similarity with the very first volume ever. I would give this an 8 out of 10. Then we have Volume 15, which has 11 chapters. This part of Berserk was really creepy because the story started to focus on kids who would try to escape the torment and torture of daily life in the world of Berserk. And in an effort to escape that torment, they turn into elf-like monstrosities because of that kid-like apostle. But the visual for this volume is definitely not one of my favorites. I think the proportions are a bit off. Guts seems a bit too small in the visual. Along with that, the bug-like apostle was definitely one of my least favorite villains, and the story was just unnerving and unsettling throughout. I would give this cover art a 6. Then we have Volume 16, which has 11 chapters. I would give this an 8 out of 10. Then we have volume 17. This was a pretty interesting part of the story because some of the new characters come into the fold. The cover art for this is rather straightforward. It does seem to depict Guts in a much more realistic way along with Puck, but overall the design is rather simple. It's hard to tell what the story within the volume is just from looking at this cover, and it doesn't really build on the themes all that much. It's mostly just a picture of both of them posing together. I would give this a 7 out of 10. Then we have volume 18. It doesn't showcase much of what happens within the story during these chapters, so I would give this cover art an 8 out of 10. Then we have volume 19. It's Guts just jumping in the air with the moon behind him. The proportions on Guts seem a bit off as well, and he doesn't really have that menacing feel he usually has when he's about to swing his sword. I'd give this a 6 out of 10. Then we have volume 20. We see Casca holding the cursed child and we see the brand of sacrifice bleeding out. It captures the essence of the story and the volume appropriately. I think this is a very well made cover art. I would give this an 8 out of 10. Then we have volume 21. I think the way Griffith is sort of shown in this is not usually how he's shown in the series. I would give this a 7 out of 10. And with the return of Griffith, this volume also brings an end to the Conviction arc. After this we have volume 22, which is where the Millennium Falcon arc begins. The cover art for this volume is unfortunately one of my least favorite. Yes, it showcases the dynamic between Guts and Griffith, and their armor definitely looks very well drawn. But the composition doesn't really evoke any special feeling. It's just two people posing together. And the character design here also seems a bit off. Maybe it's because of a different method or medium that was used, but they don't really seem like how they do within the panels and the stories. I would give this cover art a 5 out of 10. Then we have volume 23, which has 10 chapters. I quite like the cover art for this. I think there's a lot of detail in the background. While on one side we have Casca, on the other side we have the manifestation of revenge, rage, and all the anger that Guts feels. And behind all of them we have the new band of the Hawk, with all the apostles and demons and Griffith leading the charge. I think this is definitely one of the most spectacular cover arts we've seen so far, and it evokes a very menacing feeling while also capturing the essence of what this volume has. I would give this a 9 out of 10. Then we have volume 24, which has another 10 chapters. The cover art for this volume is definitely one of my favorite ones. It looks like a music album and this band is about to drop the hottest mixtape of the year. And this group of characters, especially looking back, feels so special, and it evokes a really warm feeling where we finally get to see a group of people around Guts that are actually on the mission with him together. I would give this cover art a 10 out of 10. This is hands down one of my favorite visuals I've seen so far. Then we have volume 25, which has another 10 chapters. Everywhere you look within this cover art, there is something that references the story from within the volume, and there is an exceptional amount of detail and character design that has been displayed here. I think this is again one of the much better cover arts we've seen so far. I would give this a 9 out of 10. Then we have volume 26, which has another 10 chapters. The cover art for this focuses on Guts and the physical state he's in. We've definitely seen him go through a lot of struggles and difficulties, and I think that's the essence of what's being depicted in this cover art. Overall, I think this is a bit more simple compared to what we've seen so far. I would give this a 7 out of 10. Then we have volume 27, which has another 10 chapters. So the cover art for this again has Guts as the focal point. This time he's donned the Berserker armor and the white in his hair has appeared. And after all the struggles and tribulation, it seems like it's taken a considerable toll on Guts. And in the background, we also see the manifestation of his rage with the Berserker armor and the dog. I'd give this cover art an 8 out of 10 because of the detail, the character design, and how it captures the essence of this volume. Then we have volume 28. The cover art for this showcases the Berserker armor, and I think the cover art phenomenally captures the state of the story during this point. I would give this cover art a 9 out of 10. Then we have volume 29. The cover art for this again showcases Guts, however this time we have him facing the back. I think the thought in this cover art was just giving him a really cool pose, which he definitely looks really cool, but there's not a whole lot of detail. The main focus in the detail is definitely around the character design and the pose that Guts strikes. I would give this cover art a 7 out of 10. Then we have volume 30, where we see Guts fighting against that big elephant demon sort of a thing. I feel like this is plucked from one of the manga panels and it's just been colored in. But I think it's definitely a dynamic visual, there's a lot happening and there's a lot of detail as well. I would give this cover art a 7 out of 10 again. Then we have volume 31. This is definitely one of the frames picked up from the manga panels and then colored in. But the frame itself was super cool, so because of that it definitely gets some points from me. And it conveys the emotional state that Guts is in, with his teeth grinding underneath that helmet and his eyes filled with infinite amounts of rage. I think this is a really compelling visual. I would give this an 8 out of 10. Then we have volume 32. The physical and mental state of Guts is so clearly apparent in this, and he seems so battered and bruised, and underneath him we see Nosferatu Zod with his horns sticking out into the cover art. This cover art also captures the essence of the volume during this part, as this is the first time that Guts and Zord sort of combined together, and that was a pretty iconic moment within the manga. For me, I think this is a 9.5 out of 10. Then we have volume 33 with the focal point being Griffith/Femto, but the character design for Griffith is definitely very striking. I think he looks very similar to how he appears within the manga panels as well, and the focus of the story was also around Griffith during this point in time, so I think this is a very compelling cover art. I would give this an 8 out of 10. Then we have volume 34, and again the focus here is Griffith along with Zord. In this cover art, he seems to be in the armor that he's usually wearing as the God Hand. I think there's a lot of detail here, and it also sort of connects with the essence of the story during this point. I would also give this cover art an 8 out of 10. Then we have volume 35, and this cover art is, I think, a step down from what we've seen so far. The character design for Guts is just looking a bit off here. The face he's making is not something I've usually seen him make, and yes, the entire action scene is very dynamic, but this is not a very compelling image. I would give this a 6 out of 10. Then we have volume 36. This cover art pretty much focuses on Guts, and I think the character design here is very spot on. We can sense the emotional state that he's in as he's swinging that sword. I think this is a very compelling image, and I think if I was to look at it in a bookshelf, it would definitely catch my attention. I would give this an 8 out of 10 simply on the basis of the sheer detail in the character design. Then we have volume 37, where we have Guts yet again wearing the Berserker armor. However, this time around the focus is more on a full body sort of approach, and there's a lot of blood splattering all about. It's an interesting visual, and the character design is also very cool. I think I would also give this an 8 out of 10. Then we have volume 38. I think the character design on this is very spot on, but it is definitely a compelling image, and the sheer amount of detail in this, from the background to the foreground to the strands of hair on Guts, I would give this a 7 out of 10. Then we have volume 39. Cover art in this is very spectacular. It gives a very magical and ethereal feeling as I look at it. There are so many different creatures everywhere, and the more I look, the more I see, to be honest. Guts also looks really cool in this, and it feels good to see him not quite as battered and bruised as he normally is. It feels like he's finally getting a moment to take a breather, which he very well deserved. For me, this is one of my favorite cover art, so I'd give this a 10 out of 10. Then we have volume 40. I think this cover art sort of conveys the bleak sense of being in Casca's world, which is without any color, with Guts being embodied in that battered and bruised dog, with Farnese and Shirke accompanying him. It's a bit of a dull image, to be honest, but considering the state of where we are in the volume at this point, I think it's appropriate. I would give this a 7 out of 10. Then we have volume 41, which is I think the last one that Kentaro Miura wrote, and it was a beautiful send-off to the story. Simply because of the emotions that it makes me feel, and also the amount of details that are in this, I think this is a 9 out of 10. And then we have the final volume that was released after Kentaro Miura's passing. This is a pretty good visual as well. There's a lot of detail on every end, and it's a pretty well composed image, so I think this is an 8 out of 10 for me. And that brings us to the end of the video. But if you think I could change some ratings here or there, definitely let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.